You already know what it feels like to sit down to do something hard and immediately want to stop. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, but because the moment real difficulty shows up, something in your brain fires a quiet verdict. This doesn't feel good, therefore something is wrong, and you believe it. You've been believing it your entire life. Here's what that assumption is actually costing you. Every time you treat discomfort as a signal to retreat, you are running from the very mechanism that makes hard things worth doing. Not in some abstract motivational sense. Neurologically, measurably. Your brain has a system that converts cost into value, effort into pleasure, but it only activates under one condition. You have to stop treating difficulty as the enemy. Paul Bloom, a psychologist at Yale who has dedicated his career to understanding the hidden architecture of human pleasure, arrived at a conclusion that should stop you cold. Humans are the only species that consistently finds deep pleasure in things that objectively cost them. Marathons, cold plunges, years of grinding at a skill, intellectual work that exhausts the mind. Other animals avoid discomfort. We, uniquely, can come to crave it, but only when we understand how to activate the system that makes that possible. Forget the idea that making hard things easier is the goal. That instinct is exactly backwards. By the end of this video, you'll understand why, and you'll have in hand a specific set of moves to make difficulty start working for you instead of against you. No motivational speeches, no trust the process. What follows is the actual mechanism, how your brain decides something is worth experiencing, and exactly how to use it. So let me ask you this. What if the problem was never that things are too hard, but that you never learned how to tell your brain they're worth it? Start with what you were taught, implicitly, by almost every system around you, that the goal of the mind is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. That discomfort is a problem to be solved. That if something feels hard, the intelligent response is to find a way to make it easier. Better tools, better habits, better conditions. This is the operating assumption behind most productivity advice, most self-help, most of how you probably think about motivation. Paul Bloom opens How Pleasure Works by drawing a line between two kinds of creatures. His dog comes back from a run, collapses on her bed, laps water from her bowl, and is satisfied. Simple inputs, simple outputs. The dog's pleasure system does exactly what evolutionary biology designed it to do: reward, survival-relevant behavior, punish everything else. What makes you eat, rest, seek warmth? These are Darwinian prizes, and they work the same way in your dog as in you. But then Bloom asks the question that should unsettle you. Why do humans consistently find pleasure in things that cost them nothing in survival terms, and sometimes in things that actively work against it? Why does someone train for years to run a race that will leave them physically destroyed at the finish line, and then immediately start training for the next one? Why does intellectual work that exhausts the mind feel, to the right person, like the best part of the day? Why does a musician who has practiced 10,000 hours get more from a performance than a listener who simply showed up? The answer Bloom builds toward is this: human pleasure is not primarily sensory. It is essentialist. Your brain does not respond to what an experience feels like in the moment. It responds to what it believes the experience is, where it came from, and what it cost. This is not a quirk or a bias. It is the central feature of how human pleasure works. Here is the practical implication, and it applies to something difficult in your life right now. Think of one activity you find hard to sustain, something you know matters, but that your brain consistently resists. The resistance is almost certainly not about the activity itself. It is about the story your brain is running about what the activity means and what it costs. Before you change anything about how you do it, the first move is to identify that story. Ask yourself plainly, What does my brain currently believe this effort is for? The answer will tell you everything about why it isn't yet converting into anything that feels like reward. That's where the mechanism starts. Not in the doing, in the believing. And the first belief worth examining is the one about cost. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Here is something Paul Bloom documents in How Pleasure Works that should permanently change how you approach anything difficult. Researchers took the same wine, identical liquid, same bottle, same vintage, and gave it to subjects described as costing either $10 or $90. The people who believed they were drinking the expensive wine didn't just say they enjoyed it more. The reward centers in their brains lit up differently. The medial orbitofrontal cortex, the region where sensory experience and value judgment fuse, showed measurably higher activation. The cost didn't distort the experience, it constructed it. Your brain uses perceived cost as its primary signal for how much something is worth experiencing. This is not irrational. It is the mechanism. And once you understand it, you can use it deliberately. The first way to use it is what you might call pre-framing the investment. Before you sit down to do something hard, write, train, study, build, you state, explicitly and out loud if needed, what this is costing you. Not as a complaint, as a declaration. I am giving 2 hours of my Saturday to this. That is real time, I will not get back. The brain needs to register cost before the experience begins, because that is when it sets the value expectation. If you just sit down and grind without acknowledging the investment, the brain has no signal to work with. It processes the discomfort as loss. Frame it first, and the same discomfort begins to process as investment, and investment anticipates return. The second move is making the difficulty visible. Bloom cites psychologist Justin Kruger's research, showing that when people were told a poem took 26 hours to write versus 4, they rated it as significantly higher quality and more moving, even when the poem was identical. Your brain assigns value proportional to perceived effort. This means that tracking your effort explicitly, logging hours, marking progress, naming what you pushed through, is not vanity. It is neurological priming. A training log, a word count, a streak on a calendar. These are not productivity tools. They are devices that make cost legible to the part of your brain that converts cost into value. Start keeping one. Make the effort countable. The third move is raising the cost of quitting. This sounds counterintuitive, but it follows directly from the mechanism. When you make it easy to stop, when there's no friction between discomfort and retreat, the brain never accumulates enough perceived investment to flip into reward mode. This is why public commitments work, why paying for a class in advance works, why telling someone what you're building works. You are not manipulating yourself. You are creating the conditions under which your brain takes the effort seriously enough to begin valuing it. Pick one hard thing you keep abandoning. Add one layer of cost to quitting. Tell someone, pay something, write it down with a date. The goal is not accountability in the motivational sense. The goal is to make the investment real enough that the brain registers it. The underlying principle across all three moves is the same. Your brain will not convert effort into pleasure until it first registers effort as cost. The signal has to be loud enough to matter. Once it is, the conversion begins. But it requires one more ingredient that most people never think to create. There is a detail in Paul Bloom's research on masochism that sounds bizarre until you see what it explains about your own life. He describes a woman who craved intense physical pain in certain contexts and who genuinely dreaded going to the dentist. Her boyfriend tried to reframe the dental visit as the same kind of experience she sought elsewhere. It didn't work. Not because the dentist caused more pain, but because, as Bloom writes in How Pleasure Works, the dentist was necessary pain, not something she chose. Same sensation, completely different experience. The only variable was choice. This is not an edge case, it is the switch. Your brain does not convert effort into pleasure automatically. It converts chosen effort into pleasure. The moment an activity feels imposed, by obligation, by guilt, by someone else's expectations, the same difficulty that could have generated reward generates only resentment. This is why you can spend 3 hours on a personal project and feel energized, then spend 40 minutes on a mandatory task and feel completely hollowed out. The work isn't the difference. The perception of agency is. And the reason this matters so much is that most people have collapsed that distinction entirely. They have organized their lives around hard things they experience as obligations, and then wonder why nothing they do feels worth doing. What you need is not more discipline. You need to rebuild the perception of choice around the activity, before it begins, and continuously while it's happening. Before you start anything difficult today, spend 60 seconds with one question, written down, spoken aloud, whatever makes it real for you. Why did I originally decide this mattered to me? Not why it should matter. Not why someone told you it does. Why did you decide? Go back to the actual moment if you can. The decision to take the job, start the project, commit to the practice, pursue the goal. That decision was real. Obligation and routine have layered over it, but it hasn't disappeared. What you're doing with this 60 seconds is not positive thinking. You are reactivating a neurological signal. The brain's reward circuitry responds to perceived agency. Without it, the mechanism that converts effort into value stays dormant, no matter how hard you push. Then, inside the activity itself, keep small decisions alive. When you exercise, choose your route, your pace, the exact moment you push harder. When you study, choose which problem you attack first, which section you leave for last. When you write or build or practice, choose your entry point every single session rather than defaulting to the same mechanical sequence. These decisions feel almost trivially small. They are not. The brain monitors agency continuously throughout an experience, not just at the start. Every micro-choice sends a signal. I am here voluntarily. Kill all the small decisions, reduce the activity to pure rote execution, and you kill the reward signal along with them. This is why experienced practitioners who have reduced their craft to pure habit often report losing the pleasure they once found in it. They automated away the choices. The mechanism went quiet. The harder case is when the obligation feels genuinely unavoidable. The deadline was imposed. The circumstance wasn't your idea. Here the move is surgical. Find the one real choice that lives inside the constraint. You didn't choose the deadline, but you chose how you'd meet it. You didn't choose the situation, but you chose how seriously you'd take it. That narrow point of genuine agency, however small, is enough. The brain does not require you to have chosen everything. It requires you to have chosen something and to know it. Place your attention there before you begin. That is the switch. And unlike the difficulty of the task itself, it is entirely within your control to flip it. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. In the 1950s, when instant cake mixes were introduced to American households, they failed. Not because the cakes tasted bad. They didn't. They failed because housewives didn't value them. The product required almost nothing. Add water, stir, bake. It was too easy. Sales recovered only after manufacturers changed the formula to require adding a fresh egg, a single additional step that made no meaningful difference to the final product, but made an enormous difference to how people felt about it. The cake they had contributed to felt like their cake. The effort, however minimal, created ownership, and ownership created value. Paul Bloom uses this to introduce what psychologist Michael Norton called the IKEA effect. People consistently value things they have built or contributed to with their own effort more than identical things they received passively. Even when objective quality is the same, even when the effort was small, even when the result is imperfect. In Norton's lab studies, subjects who folded their own origami frogs valued them at prices comparable to expert origami, while outside observers, who had no investment in the making, valued the same objects at a fraction of the price. The effort didn't improve the product. It improved the relationship between the person and the product. And that relationship is where pleasure lives. This is not sentimentality. It is a feature of how the brain assigns value to experience. When you contribute effort to something, the brain doesn't just record the outcome. It encodes the process as part of what the thing is. The hours you spent are woven into your perception of the result. This is why the painting you struggled over for months feels different from a print you bought in an afternoon, even if no one else can tell them apart. The effort didn't just produce the painting, it became part of what the painting means to you. And meaning is what the brain responds to when it decides how much pleasure to generate. The practical implication of this is something you can apply immediately, and it works in the opposite direction from what most people assume. Instead of trying to reduce the effort involved in things that feel unrewarding, automating, outsourcing, shortcutting, you should be looking for ways to increase your visible contribution to them. This sounds perverse. It is precise. If you are working on something that feels hollow, ask yourself honestly, how much of this am I actually building versus simply executing? Execution without construction, following a template, running someone else's system, filling in blanks, generates almost no IKEA effect, because the brain has no investment to encode. The more you design, decide, and construct from your own judgment, the more ownership the brain registers, and the more value it assigns to the activity itself. Here is a concrete way to use this. Take one project or practice in your life that currently feels like drudgery. Something you do because you must, with minimal engagement. Find one element of it that you can make genuinely yours. A method you design rather than borrow. A system you build from scratch rather than copy. A decision you make with your own reasoning, rather than defaulting to convention. It doesn't need to be the central element. It needs to be real. Then track it. Keep a record not just of what you produced, but of what you decided and why. The tracking itself matters. It makes the investment legible to the part of the brain that converts cost into value. A log of decisions made, problems solved, adjustments tested is not administrative overhead. It is the artifact that proves to your own brain that you were here, that you built something, that this cost you something real. There is a second move that compounds this. Bloom cites research by Justin Kruger, showing that the more effort people believed went into creating something, a poem, a painting, a suit of armor, the more they valued and enjoyed it, regardless of the actual quality. Perceived effort raises perceived value, which raises experienced pleasure. This means that making your effort visible to yourself, consistently and specifically, is one of the highest leverage things you can do to change how hard work feels. Not vague affirmations about how hard you're working, specific evidence, hours logged, iterations documented, problems named and solved. The brain is not persuaded by abstraction. It responds to concrete signals of investment. Give it those signals, deliberately, every time you sit down to do something difficult, and watch what it does to the experience of doing it. What this builds toward is a shift that most people only stumble into accidentally after years of practice in a domain. The point where the process itself starts to feel like the reward, not the completion, not the recognition, the actual making. When that shift happens, difficulty stops being the obstacle between you and what you want. It becomes the substance of what you want. But reaching that point requires one more layer, and it is the deepest one. It has nothing to do with what you do. It has everything to do with who you believe you are while you're doing it. Think about someone you know who genuinely loves something difficult. A runner who is out before dawn in the cold without deliberating about it. A writer who sits down every morning, not because they have to, but because something feels wrong when they don't. A musician who practices long past the point where anyone is watching. When you ask these people why they do it, the answers are rarely about outcomes. They don't say, because it makes me more productive, or because I want to achieve X. They say something simpler and stranger, because this is who I am. That answer is not a personality quirk. It is a neurological report. Paul Bloom's central argument in How Pleasure Works is that human pleasure is essentialist, meaning the brain does not respond primarily to what an experience feels like in the moment, but to what it believes the experience is and what it says about the person having it. This is why the same glass of wine tastes better when you believe it is expensive. This is why the same run feels different when you believe yourself to be a runner versus someone who is trying to exercise more. The sensory input is identical. The identity frame changes everything underneath it. Most people approach hard things from the outside in. They try to build a habit, accumulate enough repetitions, and hope that identity follows. This is backwards. Identity is not the reward you get after you've done the work long enough. It is the precondition that makes the work sustainable in the first place. When the brain has no identity anchor for a difficult activity, when the activity remains something you do rather than something that expresses who you are, every session starts from zero. Every morning is a negotiation. The effort never accumulates into anything because there is no self to accumulate it into. The move here is to construct the identity claim before the behavior has fully justified it, and to do so specifically and in writing. Not, I want to become someone who exercises, but I am someone who takes physical difficulty seriously. Not, I'm trying to write more, but I am a writer, and writers write even when it's hard. This is not delusion. It is the deliberate use of the mechanism Bloom describes, the brain's tendency to experience things through the lens of what it believes them to be. When you tell the brain who you are, it begins filtering experience through that claim. The hard run becomes evidence of identity rather than evidence of suffering. The difficult session becomes an expression of self rather than an imposition on it. To make this concrete, take the hardest recurring thing in your life right now. The practice, the discipline, the work you keep struggling to sustain. Write one sentence that describes the kind of person who does that thing naturally and without negotiation. Then ask yourself, as honestly as you can, does my current self-concept include that person? Or am I holding that identity at arm's length, waiting to claim it until I've earned it through enough repetition? If it's the latter, you have identified exactly why the effort keeps feeling like a cost you're paying rather than a life you're living. The identity claim has to come first. Behavior follows belief, not the other way around. There is a second layer to this that is equally practical. Identity needs reinforcement through what psychologists call behavioral evidence. Small, consistent actions that your brain can point to as proof that the claim is true. This is where the identity strategy and the effort tracking from the previous part connect. When you log your sessions, document your decisions, name what you push through, you are not just making cost visible. You are building a case file, evidence that the identity claim is real. Each entry tells your brain, this is not something I'm trying. This is something I do. This is who I am. The accumulation of that evidence is what transforms an aspirational identity into a felt one. And a felt identity is one the brain will defend, seek out, and find pleasure in expressing. The final piece is how you talk about the difficult thing in conversation. This sounds almost too simple to matter. It is not. When someone asks what you do, and you say, I'm trying to get into running versus I run, You are sending two completely different signals to your own brain about where you stand in relation to the activity. The hedged version, trying, working on, hoping to, keeps the identity at a distance. It preserves the exit, and the brain, registering that the exit is preserved, never fully commits. Drop the hedge. Claim the identity in the present tense, in public, before you feel you've fully earned it. The discomfort of that claim is itself a signal. It means the identity is stretching you, which is exactly where growth lives. What all of this builds toward is the point where difficulty and identity become so fused that the question of whether to do the hard thing stops arising. It is simply what you do, because it is simply who you are. That is not a personality type you were born with. It is a construction, deliberate, specific, available to anyone who understands the mechanism. And once it is in place, the last shift can happen. The one where difficulty stops being something you tolerate and starts being something you seek. There is a moment that every person who has ever mastered something difficult describes in almost identical terms, regardless of the domain. The runner who used to dread every mile starts to feel wrong on the days she doesn't run. The writer who used to stare at the blank page with dread starts to feel restless when he hasn't written. The musician who used to practice out of obligation starts to feel incomplete without it. From the outside, this looks like passion, some innate fire that certain people have and others don't. From a psychological standpoint, it is neither of those things. It is the natural endpoint of a brain that has accumulated enough evidence, enough cost registered, enough choice maintained, enough effort encoded, enough identity reinforced, to begin anticipating reward in the process itself, rather than only at the finish line. Bloom calls this the point where the brain stops treating difficulty as a threat and starts treating it as a signal that something valuable is happening. This shift is not accidental and not reserved for the gifted, but it will not come if you keep trying to get there by making things easier. The entire productivity industry is built on reducing friction, optimizing conditions, minimizing resistance, making hard things feel less hard. And some of that is useful at the margins, but as a primary strategy, it works directly against the mechanism. Every time you successfully reduce the difficulty of something before your brain has had the chance to assign value to that difficulty, you rob the mechanism of its raw material. The ease feels like progress. It is the opposite. Difficulty is not the obstacle between you and the reward. It is the substance the reward is made from. What this means practically is that your relationship with discomfort needs to change at the level of interpretation, not management. When something is hard, and you feel the familiar pull to retreat, that moment is not a problem to be solved. It is the exact moment the mechanism is asking you to feed it. Sit with the difficulty for 60 seconds before you do anything else. Name it explicitly. This is hard, and I am choosing to stay. That act, small, almost invisible, is what accumulates into the shift. The brain learns what you repeatedly show it. Show it that difficulty is where you go, not where you stop, and it will eventually start sending you there on its own. The gap between what most people are capable of and what they actually produce is not a gap of talent or intelligence. It is a gap of sustained engagement with difficulty. Close that gap through cost, choice, ownership, identity, and almost everything else follows. The version of you who has learned to want hard things does not need to be motivated or tricked into showing up. They simply do. If that shift is starting to happen somewhere inside you right now, don't let it stop here. The video appearing on your screen is the next step in the same process. Click to keep watching.